Hey, I've been working on this essay way too long and I've written so many drafts and so many versions of it, I don't even know how I feel about this. Along with the show I supposedly care so much about, I've lost sight of the bigger picture. I don't know how it turned out. I do not know if it's worth anyone's time. But here it is. I'm 23 years old, privileged and uncertain about what to do. Watching Shin Chan with my brother, waiting for Shin Chan films to be released are some of my fondest memories from childhood. The earliest thing I can remember ever wanting to do as a child was to make a Shin Chan film. In future I would also develop an interest in being a filmmaker, but this fascination with Shin Chan predates that. Today I like writing screenplays as a hobby. I'm a Cog-Sci grad student right now. I think a lot of my peers right now are lost and tired and just feel not ready for what life's throwing at them. We're all in our 20s. To talk about growing up with Shin Chan as an adult isn't possible without talking about the experience of adulthood. The transition to adulthood is obviously not an easy one. Responsibilities on the horizon suddenly make you realize the meaninglessness of life. I wouldn't say that children are oblivious to this meaninglessness. It just doesn't matter at that point. In the absence of burden, children are able to appreciate the absurdity of the world around them and carry on. You simply cannot function like that as an adult. The show makes it obvious with its dichotomy between the liberty of children and the struggle of adults. The adults are allowed to be elated from their burden from time to time when they're able to realize the embrace of absurdity in children. They're able to gaze past their suffering and momentarily appreciate the innocence. It's a luxury. That's kind of me looking back at Shin Chan. It overtly shows those themes, yes, but it also reminds me of the lens I used to look at it with. The person I used to be and how it has changed. I had a bias. It's only natural that I related more with the kids back then. Po Chan was my favorite. I could just find the comfort and the joy of doing whatever. I had fears and insecurities, but they were more immediate than existential. More to do with the fear of my mom deciding to teach me than the fear that I'm going to regret every second of my life from this second onwards. The thought of approaching responsibilities didn't haunt me. Even though I liked the adult characters, they felt more tangential to the show. One thing I didn't realize back then was that it's not really a choice you get to make. That kind of misery is pretty much inevitable with growing up. Let me just tell you what I'm going to talk about here. I'll talk about the show, of course, and what it means to me. I cannot meaningfully do that without talking about the films and the production of the whole thing. So I'll also talk about some of the many films and the creators who have been attached to the show. My intention isn't necessarily to tell you what the show is about. I'm just hoping to connect with people on something that obviously means so much to so many. This handy book. This handy book is the source of a lot of information you'll see here. I'll talk more about it at the end if you're curious. It is important to understand the context in which Shin Chan was watched because it has a tendency to be a different show in different places. It can be pretty raunchy depending on the culture it's being aired in. As a producer, you can either avoid those elements through censorship or even lean into them like the infamous Funimation dub. A bunch of scenes are cut out in the Indian dubs. Alcohol is referred to as juice and romantic relationships are referred to as friendship with an intonation. It honestly feels like a satire sometimes, but that's a discussion for another day. The show follows the world around this one kid and is pretty mindful about distributing importance and screen time between all the other characters. There's the Kasukabe Defense Force consisting of Shin-Chan's primary group of friends. The 5-year-old superficially fantasize about doing good for the society. His parents are an integral part of the show and quite beloved. Hiroshi Nohara, Shinchan's dad, is an average salaryman trying to keep it together. Misai Nohara is Shinchan's mom, often dealing with similarly existential problems as a homemaker. The teachers at his kindergarten are no less interesting. The characters aren't as one note as I make them sound, nor are they as dramatic. The show does all that while maintaining a great sense of humor. An episode usually consists of 3 anecdotes that can sometimes be continuous. I would say that most of these episodes do not consist of a hardened plot. It feels more like witnessing a story unfold. That has been one of the more valuable qualities of the show for me. In an early episode, Hiroshi comes home from work frustrated with the stagnation in his career. He's distraught and longs to open the toy store of his dreams. It leads to the family spending the night together, just talking. Misai wants to de-escalate the situation and convince Hiroshi to not quit his job, though she soon joins him in his imaginations and even runs with it after getting drunk. Her wayward fantasies about opening a cafe make even Hiroshi uncomfortable and he goes to sleep. He wakes up the next morning and realizes that he's late for work before rushing to the office. The episode just ends there. No mention of how sad he was last night. The slice of life aspect. The slice of life aspect of the show completely entranced me before I even knew what slice of life was. I guess there's some credit due to the Hindi dub as well. I don't know what the original talks about in some places because a comprehensive sub is not really available for the show. But the dub is certainly an interesting instance of Indianization of a piece of media. I'm more inclined to believe that this show benefited from its adaptation. It was funny and it certainly reflected an image of Indian culture that a lot of kids related with. Well, that's not a word. Mundanity makes a significant portion of what the show is. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of shows that explore the slice of life elements, but again, I didn't grow up with them. I grew up with this show. That doesn't take away any credibility from it though. Staying at home alone watching TV by myself is some of the most nostalgic memories I have. All that freedom means so much more when you sneakily get to explore a world you're not supposed to. Many of us were forbidden from watching that show. Shin-Chan is about those moments. We feel nostalgic about the weirdest things. It's not vivid memories of what happened, it's these feelings captured in these tiny motifs of the smell of the pool or the ice cream vendors. Shin-Chan capitalizes on setting up these motifs in a way that it almost blurs the line between nostalgia rooting from reality and from the media you consume. One of the earlier episodes of Shin-Chan I can recall is him just going shopping with his mom. They come across one of those unmanned stores in Japan. They operate on an honor system. The scene is just a sweet, authentic interaction between these two and the store. Nostalgia for some reason seems to always be associated with mundanity. Those moments of quiet is ultimately what feels pleasant in reminiscence. It's also evident in the Shin-Chan films. I'm going to pull out a number out of thin air like a true professional. 80% of the first Shin-Chan films takes place in the second half. But what I remember today is the mundane 20% that sets it up. Almost nothing happens, but it meant so much more. I think you get the sentiment. The show had its own unique way to romanticize mundanity. Crayon Shin Chan does not only encapsulate the experiences of a child, but also gives us a special look of the world of adults, primarily around children. I think that discussing the process of making Shin Chan will provide great insights into what made this show special. It's important to talk about the artists who worked on it. It's a story of a lot of confusion and uncertainty, and honestly, it's a huge part of what made this show special. The show has its own identity. It varies a lot, but it has its own identity. You see, one of the unique features of the show is the amount of creative freedom the artists got while working on each episode. A bunch of them would have their own style and animation. In the early years, this fact was yet to come to its full bloom. It took some time, but not too long, for the show to separate itself from the manga. Talking about the show is made much easier when you use the films as a reference point. The conversation about the films is slightly different from that about the show. Crayon Shin Chan has had this uninterrupted ritual of annual film releases since 1993. Not only are they an interesting expansion on the themes of the show, they are also evidence of this tug of war in Crayon Shin Chan trying to find its identity. It's something that will get more obvious as we discuss the creators who influenced the show. If you are not too aware of the world of Shin-chan, you can start with the show, but the films aren't a bad place to start either. They're worth checking out, and if you grew up with Shin-chan, chances are that you haven't watched many of the films that weren't dubbed in your language. Even though I'm not really going to talk about those films here, I recommend looking into them. It's absurd to even consider what movies would spawn out of a show like this. The show can be slightly absurd, but its mostly slice of life elements stand opposed to the idea of an event film, which most Shin-chan films are. Somehow, some of the Shin-chan films aren't just great Shin-chan films. They've also developed a reputation of being great works of animation and storytelling in general. Looking at how creators approach the films is a great way to understand how the films were influenced over the years. I'm going to talk about two of these guys, Mitsuru Hongo and of course, Keiichi Hara. Hongo was at the helm of Shin-chan's development since the beginning. Along with the show, he was in charge of the first 4 films. The first 2 Shin-chan films I ever watched were Hongo films, Buri Buri Kingdom and Haigure. He spent a huge chunk of his time at this position trying to figure out who the show was meant for. Unlike the manga, the anime ended up catering to young kids for a more general appeal, which makes sense considering the age of 5-year-old Shin-chan. Even though it continues to be dialed down over the years, the maturity is still preserved to an extent. I cannot confidently say that for the more recent stuff because I haven't really bothered to look into much of that. The progress of the show is more easily captured in the progress of the first 4 films. Hongo's approach to Shin-chan films from the beginning was to introduce out-of-the-world elements to the world of Shin-chan. The first film featured Action Kamen, Shin-chan's beloved superhero from TV, coming to life in some strange interdimensional plot. The struggle to decide the target audience for the show continued for years, and ultimately resulted in a particularly interesting IP which, at its best, caters to children without losing the sensibilities of the grown-ups who make them. Reading about the behind the scenes, it's clear that you cannot really create something like this while putting in low effort just because it's children's media. Reading Hongo's interviews gives me the sense that he only cared for making something for children. He didn't seem particularly interested in adding some personal expression to it. This isn't to say that he didn't have his own voice. He approached these first few films with themes of sci-fi and fantasy, which probably laid ground for the absurdity in the Shin-chan films to come. The overt tendencies of these films is made more obvious when he returned to the franchise after years of being away from it and made a film that is so undeniably Hongo. That's Hongo for you. Is Hongo what made Shin-chan so special? Sure, he contributed to it, but what made Shin-chan special is not one person's vision. It's actually quite the opposite of that. Of course, Hongo in his films focused on more family-oriented themes. He wanted the kids to leave with some morals and faith in their families. But the real magic of Shin-chan lies in its ability to be different things depending on who's making it. It allows the show to explore themes such as melancholy in a relatively nuanced manner. There's an interesting amount of troubled characters in the show, most of them for comedic purposes, but still, the Nohara family has to temporarily move to this new place because their old place that they've been living in gets destroyed in a blast. Of course, the cast of the neighboring characters changes, and since it's a relatively cheap place, these neighbors are all mostly in the struggling phases of their lives. These neighbors consist of Yonro, a stressed-out student who continuously fails to pass a certain university exam, a teen mother who has to raise her daughter by herself, and even a struggling actress. While they continue to exist, there's also this lonely character of Matsuzaka, one of Shin-chan's teachers throughout the show. She's always desperately looking for men to date, and in some way or the other, it never works out for her. She always tries to stand out among her peers as a woman of class and is afraid of projecting otherwise. On a Christmas episode, Shin-chan's helping these three recurring characters sell cake. He spots Matsuzaka, who's internally lamenting her loneliness on this festive day and has somehow found it in herself to celebrate regardless by buying a cake for herself. Insecure about seeming alone, she lies about her plans to go to a party and ends up buying the largest cake. That's it. The episode just ends there. There's also Misai's younger sister, Musai. She isn't romantically engaged with someone either, but she's not really interested in changing that. She wants to be a photographer, but her father disapproves of that. He wants her to get married. He believes that she's too lazy to achieve anything, which isn't exactly false from what we see of her. She leaves her home and secretly starts living with the Nohara family. She's childish and is often paired up with Shin-chan because of her tendency to be messy and annoy Misai. However, she does land a job as a photographer's assistant after her father gives her an ultimatum. She loses that job after some time and starts working at a bookstore. The nuance doesn't only lie in the blend of comedy with the melancholic undertone. It's obvious that this is only able to exist because of the freedom to express the artists get while working on this show. Crayon Shin Chan is surprisingly experimental with its visuals. The ongoing anime started being adapted from the manga in 1992. The style of art and storytelling has evolved significantly over the years, and it even grew slightly surreal from time to time during what I consider to be the peak of the show. It's had a history of nurturing great animators early in their careers. The most recognizable of them is Masaki Yuasa, and the influence of his style is easily discernible in the show. It features these heavily stylized visuals with goofy movements and angular design that I've come to associate with Yuasa. Now, I only know that he worked on this show. It's unfair to attribute all these qualities to Yuasa. Plenty other animators worked on the show, namely Shizuka Hayashi, Masami Otsuka, and Yuichiro Tsuyoshi. Of course, there were more. Although I'm less familiar with their works, I'll try to exhibit examples of each of their styles. I cannot say how accurate this figure is, but I found it on some Korean wiki. The art directors apparently had enough creative control that their idiosyncrasies are noticeable across different anecdotes within the same episode. I'll leave a link to a 2016 interview with Masaki Uwasa if you're more curious about the production of this show. Hara worked on Shin-chan as a storyboard artist pretty much from the beginning. He was the direct successor to Hongo and brought new energy to the world of Shin-chan, while Hongo introduced a fantastical, almost storybook-like element to the world of Shin-chan. Hara's films felt more muted. They're still bizarre and weird and not afraid to experiment, but it feels like a strength of Hara's tenure of the next 6 films that he doesn't rely too much on fantasy to capture interest. While studying animation at his art school, Hara soon realized that his skills weren't enough for him to make it in this highly competitive environment. He decided to get into the production side of things, thinking that he had better chances making it as a director or something. Hara started working at Shin Animation, first assigned to Doraemon. He later started working on Crayon Shin Chan when its production was set in motion in the same studio. He grew up with a lot of films and had aspirations to become a serious filmmaker. He was naturally bummed out when he found himself working on just some kids' TV shows. When he took over, Hara's films were without a doubt larger than life, but they usually didn't contain magic or superpowers, at least as a part of the characters we follow. Potentially because of Hara's disinterest in making media for children, his films would delve more into the mundane, even being thematically more prevalent. One was about growing up, taking charge, while another was about doing the right thing. It's needless to say a lot of his personal expression was a part of many of these films, which ultimately made these Shin-chan films genuinely acclaimed standalone films. Unfortunately, I didn't watch a lot of these films as a kid because they weren't dubbed in my language. Adult Empire Strikes Back is a notable one. Accented Cinema has a great video on that. I recommend you check out both, that and the film. What I will briefly talk about is the first film he made. Dark Tama Tama is the first film Hara made. I will not describe the plot too much. It basically involves Himawari swallowing some marble which has some vague divine powers, which causes all these people to suddenly be after her. This film has so much. Shin-chan is sort of coming to terms with having a younger sibling. Throughout the film, he's learning to take care of his sister instead of being envious of the attention she gets. Apart from the really fun action comedy, the slice of life elements are just beautiful. There's an entire scene where they have to risk going to a supermarket to buy diapers, somewhere right before the climax where all these parties are after taking over the world or something generic like that. There's this scene where the Nohara family is about to begin their journey to rescue Himawari.
青空を見つめていると俺にも帰るところがあるような気がすると誰かが言った。もう会社なんてどうだっていい。世界の危機もどうでもいい。どんなひどいことになっても家族が一緒にいさえすれば乗り越えられる。ミサエ、しんのすけ、ひまわりを助け出してみんなで家に帰るぞ。
How can something like that not stick with you when you watch it as a kid? At this moment, another peculiar proclivity of the show starts coming to the forefront. It heavily starts dealing with the ideas of ambition and romanticizes the lack of them. Yakiniku Rodam, localized in India as Masala Story, exemplifies this proclivity perfectly. It was made by Hara's brief but immediate successor, Tsutomu Mitsushima. Hara's influence is still very much noticeable in the film, and he was a part of the writing as well. The Nohara family is excited for a meal. They're a frustrated middle-class family who this morning decide to have yakiniku that night. This excitement for a rare premium dinner is interrupted by a car ramming into their house. Stuff happens, there's a MacGuffin everybody's after, and the Nohara family is on the run. It's a classic Shin Chan movie premise. An organization of villains designed by someone who obviously loves movies are after them. The organization has hijacked the media and everybody around them believes that they're criminals. They suddenly have no one to turn to. After running heedlessly for a while, they find out that the head office of the organization is located in Atami, a coastal city far from where they are right now. The objective in this film becomes to get to Atami from this point onwards. They go through many challenges and it's all hilarious and thrilling, of course. The film continues to progressively grow more absurd. Their lives are at stake and at some point even the world seems at stake. But when they do need the motivation to face those challenges, they mostly look at the vivid fantasies of returning to their home and enjoying the glorious yakiniku. Dubbed in Hindi as Acha Khana. That romantic idea of a good meal drives them more than the broad idea of saving their lives or even the world. Of course, it's not just yakiniku, it's just a stand-in for something more nuanced. There's often this desire to return to a state of normality in the world of Shin-chan, and this desire is prevalent nowhere else more than it is in this film. When the family defeats this group of villains that has been chasing them this entire film, they just passively retreat. One of the villains is the serious kind. He's straight up Bill Koger from Apocalypse Now. And he's pretty much a juxtaposition in how he acts and what he desires. At this point, he finally goes surfing after going on about it the whole day. The other, more comical one, goes back home with his wife who comes to pick him up at the end of the day. You immediately realize that these antagonists aren't really invested in this pursuit. Their failure doesn't ruin their lives, it's just a job. The desire to merely live despite suffering is not as strong as the yearning for a good meal, the joy of surfing, or the comfort of returning home to loved ones at the end of the day. Those who have that aspect of their lives figured out can endure great suffering, and the rest become miserable victims of that same suffering. After all these villains leave, the Nohara family still has to confront the boss. Although it continues to grow more absurd in what feels like a second climax, it feels tagged on and uninteresting to me. You can form your own opinion on it, but for me, other than some loose ends, the film just ends there. It's not uncommon for the world to be in danger in Shin-chan films. What works for them usually is their disinterest in a heroic narrative. It's a fairly normal family of which the normal trajectory has been disturbed. All they want is to return to normalcy. The family is pretty much an antithesis to heroes. Talking about an antithesis to heroes, Buri Buri Zaimon is one of my favorite characters from the show. But I'll refrain from talking about him because this video already seems too long. What I'll choose to talk about instead is how these themes exist in the show, because I feel that we have been talking a little too much about just the movies. I also feel the need to just say it again that Shin-Chan is not just this, it's a really funny show. Its comedy is not something I can describe, so I just stick to what stood out to me after all this time. I mentioned it earlier, and I'm assuming you have watched the show too, and you might remember that their house blows up at some point. Hiroshi takes a day off from work to look for a new place to live. He is, again, an average salaryman and isn't able to find an affordable place after searching all day. This moment of distraught leads him to reminisce about the early days of his marriage, and over a montage of Misai calling his name over the duration of their marriage, he decides to settle for a small apartment that reminds him of those old times. It's not much, but it pulls the right strings, even effectively removed from their normal state. The objective isn't necessarily to recover what was normal, but to reclaim that feeling of contentment that normality brought. The greatest ambition in the world of Shin-Chan is to accept things as they are and maintain that sense of bittersweet normality. There are no overarching goals, and the characters just adapt to whatever the world brings them. Whatever the world brings them. The melancholy in Shin-Chan, a lot of the times, acts as a foil to these ideas of normality. Characters like Matsuzaka, for example, the root of a lot of her problems is shown to be the desperation she has to change where she currently is. This strong emphasis on the lack of ambition is contrasted the most by one character, Kazama. He is Shin-Chan's closest friend and stands as a direct contradiction to everything Shin-Chan and the show stands for. He's the one going to extra classes, learning English, and looking forward to becoming successful in the future. He is shown to do this at the expense of living it up. Shin-Chan tends to challenge his tendency for ambition. He's the one who's always there to remind him what's actually important. This, though, is a problematic aspect of the show. One of the films explores exactly these aspects, The Flower of Tenkatsu Academy. This is the only film I talk about that I hadn't watched as a kid. It's not been dubbed in Hindi, I only recently watched it. It's one of the recent films. You might have noticed that Shin-Chan tends to take more of a center stage in the films compared to the show. Other characters are also important, but he tends to be more representative of what the films are trying to convey. It does so by focusing on traits of Shin-Chan that make him more nonchalant and carefree. Things always just work out for him. He's often depicted as this kid with all kinds of inherent talents. In the recent films, they've had this interesting approach where they choose to focus on one of the characters other than Shin-Chan. This can be his parents or one of the friends from the Kasukabe Defense Force. The Tenkatsu Academy film does exactly that by focusing on Kazama. The 5 friends of Kasukabe Defense Force decide to visit an elite summer school. The school has a ranking system where those who perform better are regarded more highly. Obviously, as the guy who is defined by his desire to make the best of himself, this is Kazama's dream school. And this is Kazama's movie. He feels this pressing need to work towards his bright future, which his peers from school tend to hinder. This film explores that dynamic with a little more complexity. While Kazama is still driven to move forward, he also has this sense that he might have to leave his friends behind in the process. As the ranking system amplifies those feelings, Kazama grows more anxious. This is all too familiar to Indian students, and it's an important subject to tackle. The film quite effectively brings the absurdity of these ambitions to light, but I do have a gripe with it. A gripe that extends beyond just this film. Kazama, by the end of the climax of the film, is a mind-controlled guy blinded by his ambition. Shin-Chan, in direct competition again, makes him realize the importance of authentic relationships. A lot of these films tend to revolve around this idea that the aspiration of greatness is somehow less noble than whatever the slice of life ideologies are. And this film does not do much to fix that. If I had a criticism for the show, I would say that it can be a little one-sided sometimes. Hustle culture and the problems associated with hustle culture don't look like that in reality. It almost shames the presence of ambition as if it only exists at the expense of something more meaningful. I agree with it to a certain degree, and it's a much needed validation in the lives of a lot of people, but there's some nuance to it. Still, it's a nice film. I like Kazama. I just prefer it when Shin-chan does not offer strong resolutions. To me, its essence lies in coming to terms with your present while not giving up. It's a comforting idea. Almost done. It's a comforting show. I've seen many eyes on the internet looking back at this show with a mix of nostalgic emotions. The show, along with its audience, survives growing up. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do at the beginning of this video about life in general. And after spending over a year on and off on what I also wanted to be an introspective look at my own life, I'm still not. I find myself looking back at this show and even rewatching it sometimes, and it offers me great comfort in difficult times. I'm sure it's true for a lot of people, even though we look at it with a different, probably more layered lens as we grow up to recognize the residue of the adults who poured their hearts into it. Shin-chan is still a show about children and it's made for children. I feel that the idea of a children's show that can also be enjoyed by adults is a slightly foolish one. Children are not stupid. They just consume what they're given and often what's familiar without the luxury of being critical. They deserve to be treated with more nuance. Crayon Shin Chan just put in the effort to respect its young audience. I've watched and loved a lot of shows as a kid, but Crayon Shin Chan is one of the few that have stuck with me. The part of my brain that was perhaps shaped by Shin Chan offers me great comfort and a sense of optimism in stressful times. Maybe I'm wrong, and those things that I find missing are just things that don't need saying for the purposes of this show. Regardless, I'm really happy to have been able to express my feelings for Crayon Shin Chan. And I hope that I didn't just say a whole lot of nothing. So this is the book I was talking about earlier. It contains a lot of interviews and stories from all these people who worked on the show. That's Hongo, and I'm sure you'll see that's Hara over here. And it also contains these amazing storyboards from the show, which also gives you an insight into how the animation was planned behind the scenes, and you will probably recognize a lot of characters and scenes from here. Again, this is a section mostly talking about the films almost one by one and what these people who worked on the show think, what Shin-chan means and what the essence of Shin-chan is. And they almost go by dissecting each movie at a time. But it's not just that. One of the things I wanted to do as a part of this project was making a soft copy of this book available. I wanted to digitize this book because I looked for it a lot everywhere before buying it, and I could not find it. I want this book to be archived, but the methods I find accessible for doing that right now include destroying the book, breaking its spine to scan it properly. If I find any better ways to do it, I would definitely love to. And I tried using one of those scanner apps on phone, I guess, but the quality does not seem to do it justice. Maybe if somebody actually really wants it, I will go out of my way to scan it with the phone app and upload it somewhere and share the link in the description. Otherwise, I would just really like to digitize it more properly without destroying it, because I really care about this book and it's difficult to find. Thank you for watching.